All right, what's up, everyone? Omid from CodeLab here, and welcome back to the third and final video in our series on React Native. So in this video, we will primarily be talking about how to style and sort of make your apps look pretty and add proper styling conventions into your code. So the first thing that I kind of want to talk about is just like at the core of things, how does styling work on a mobile app? So like I mentioned in our last video, CSS is not technically a thing in React Native development. Here, instead, we use something called StyleSheets. Very, very similar concepts to CSS, but technically not the same. And a lot of those old like key value pair arguments are no longer there, and there might be some different sort of values that you can provide for certain arguments than you're used to. So if you're ever looking to do a certain thing, we do highly recommend that you look it up, because not everything is like a one-to-one translation from CSS. So you should typically look up how to do things specifically in React Native. But for the matter of how to like syntactically do style, there are a few ways to do it. The first way that we will cover is the way that you should probably not do, but it's like the simplest one to just like see how things work, is style. So the style argument, you can pass it into pretty much any component that is native to React Native. That's kind of weird to say, but basically it's, again, just kind of key value pairs directly of like a specific quality or characteristic or property, technically speaking, to a direct value. So here you can see we have style. So you pass in the style argument, then you put two brackets, so two opening and then two closing brackets. And then within that, it's basically just a comma separated list of these key value pairs. So we have like a height of 40, whatever that means. We have a border color for this text input box of gray. Notice how gray is passed in as a quote here because we are using JavaScript. And then the border width is set to 1. So that's the general style. Some of these properties might not make sense yet, but that's how you just do style at its basic core level. So now, kind of moving on from that, again, like we said, just like with web development, using inline styles is generally not recommended. It's not a very clean way to do things. So what we actually recommend is kind of what the React Native style convention does, is that if you just have like a small amount of styles, or you just want to like quickly get something up and running, like for testing, you actually can create an entire style sheet inside of your JSX file down beneath your function that's getting exported. And then from there, you can call specific pieces of that variable throughout your code to reference that specific style. So let's say, for example, here that I want to render some red code, like we can see here on the right side of my screen right now. Basically, all that you have to do is right down here, you create a style variable that represents a singular style sheet. So we can say const styles is equal to stylesheet.create. And then basically in here, we have an open parentheses and an open bracket and a closed bracket and a closed parentheses down here. And then inside of here, we can create individual styles which have their own name. So at this point, you're basically, to draw a comparison to CSS, even though they're not technically the exact same thing, you are creating a CSS class within this styles variable. So you can think of styles kind of like a singular CSS file and container like a singular CSS class. There's no technical notation between classes and IDs in React Native like there are in CSS, but just think of container like a class which has specific properties like adding a margin top. Big Blue has specific properties like adding a color, a font weight, a font size, etc., etc. And then to actually reference these, you again will be using the inline style command, but instead of defining your thing here, which is not good for code readability or code reusability, you could just do styles.read. And note again, styles is just the name of the variable that represents your style sheet. This could be literally anything. It doesn't have to say styles. And then you just do dot and then the name of the specific class that you want to reference. You can use this class as many times over as you want. And you can just, again, use a comma to denote them being in a list. And notice how we use the array bracket instead of like the object bracket, straight instead of squiggly, basically. And that's because we are listing styles from a specific variable. We are not actually defining them inline like we were in the code that I just showed to you guys. So that's the basics of how you define a style. Again, if you ever need any specific properties, we highly recommend that you just look them up. It's pretty easy to find information like that. But this is generally how you make a style in React Native. Now, another sort of, this is weird to say, but another sort of code styling thing about how you declare styles. Again, we really recommend that you never declare them inline. It just does not make for good readable code. You can declare them at the bottom of your file, so like beneath the function that's being exported, But again, we don't recommend doing this style of thing right here where it's like const styles is equal to stylesheet.create inside of the same file where you're using those styles. Because again, you could create one style sheet that could be usable for multiple different components, all in multiple different JavaScript files. So for code readability and for code reusability, we highly recommend that you follow this piece of syntax right here. This actually is not taken from the React Native documentation. This is on another website that we will be linking inside of the bootcamp text. And basically what you can do is you can create a file that is meant just for your style sheet. So it's still a JavaScript file, but the good thing about it, like you can see with this name right here, button.component.style.js, is that it's denoted as a style file, but it's still JavaScript. It's not CSS, it's still JavaScript. And what you're doing is you are literally just exporting a style sheet that you just created, and you're giving it the exact same name. So the syntax here, you might have to copy paste it a few times before you can actually like get used to it. But you're basically just creating a style sheet that's being exported. So it's what this file is like returning in a way, basically. And it's just the creation of a new style sheet with these classes, with these key value pairs, same thing that we were just looking at. So the syntax inside of the style sheet does not change. You're now just exporting it from another file to make things more modular. And then now all of the code being exported from this style right here, you can then import in this file right up here. So you see right up here, we do have this import statement called import the style sheet, text, and view from React Native. That's just the normal React Native imports. And then now here from the button component, you can actually import styles itself. And this styles that's being imported is what you're exporting right here. You can name this anything you want. They just named it styles. This could be named styles number 5. But this is what you are calling what is being exported or returned from this file. And now you'll notice we just say styles.container because container is the class for this styles variable that's being exported or, in simpler terms, returned from this JavaScript file. So that's generally the cleanest way that we recommend handling styles and just kind of programmatically building them out in React Native. Now, 2 more small stylistic things that we do want to go over. You will notice back here in our code that height, for example, did not have a sort of like unit next to it. So if you are at all used to web development, you'll notice that usually whenever you list a number for something like height or width, it should have like a PX next to it, like an REM or like an EM or some sort of value like that. But pixel values are actually unitless in React Native. And technically calling the pixel values is incorrect. It is a dimension. So dimensions are unitless in React Native. So you'll notice here in their example on their page on height and width, there's no units. And that's because when you set dimensions, you normally just give the value. And technically speaking, there is no universal mapping from like device to a physical measurement. So in a very rare case, this might end up resulting in some issues like some overflow off your screen or things like not looking perfect. But for the most part, you can generally just kind of size them out yourself and you'll get used to exactly what sort of like 50 looks like on a mobile screen. So this is kind of the hard part because normally if you're given like a Figma design from a designer, it will kind of tell you like, hey, this piece of like this little like scroll view blocks right here, this block, it should be like 50 pixels large, but you can't just necessarily type 50. It won't directly map one-to-one to it per se. So you kind of have to get used in your own like experimentation to what exactly like a width of 50 looks like and how that should necessarily map over to a mobile design that you're trying to implement from a UI standpoint. But that's basically how height and width work. There is something called Flexbox. This is basically what Bootstrap is sort of built off of. We will not be explaining it for the sake of these videos because this is more of a UI implementation specific thing, but in short, React Native supports Flexbox using Flex. And we'll kind of leave some good links on like stuff to read more about this, but when the time comes to build out UIs that are sort of dynamic and they're not just hard-coded height and width values, which you should not always be using. You shouldn't just always hard-code height and width because sometimes you want stuff to be dynamic based on device size. At that point, you can then use Flex, but we will link some more reading on this because it's a bit too nuanced to kind of go in for the sake of this video. But now the very last thing that we would like to very quickly discuss is rendering static images. So let's say you have a link from some other guy on the web that you do want to render into your app. Basically, when you have this image tag right here, basically all that you have to do is pass in this source argument right here, again with 2 brackets. And basically from there, the URI argument will have a corresponding string value to it, which is basically just the link to your URL. So if I actually click on this, It opened up on my other screen, but this is just like an actual link that does represent like a real PNG file. And basically this URI is just that actual link, and then that will actually end up rendering on your app itself. You see right here. Now, if you end up downloading it, like you normally should, you shouldn't just be displaying web links. You should really be downloading it and then displaying it from the app files itself. So if you were to have downloaded that image inside your source argument, instead of saying URI and passing in an argument there, you can just, inside of your brackets right here, you can just say require and then the path to your image. Pretty straightforward. Again, just require path to the image. In general, though, we do recommend the structure kind of like they describe right here, where you have one big folder for all of your images, and then you're just kind of pulling them out from there. So like the pathing thing here, it's similar to how you path in regular React or like in Unix, for example. You're just kind of navigating however you are, or like from wherever you are in reference relevant to that current image folder. You're just kind of navigating to it, and then you are referencing the exact PNG or SVG file that you want to reference in particular. But that is all for this video. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you all enjoyed the React Native series. Thank you.